How do you go on living after a breakup? When you planned a future with someone, spent so much time together, shared moments that are now stuck in your mind, and now you have to realize that's it. This person is no longer in your life. How do you accept that and how do you move forward?
Well, first of all, maybe the story isn't over yet. There are plenty of cases where people have officially broken up 2 or even 3 times. I mean, they had a divorce certificate saying they were no longer husband and wife, but still, they ended up getting married again. So, in my professional opinion, as long as your loved one is not currently married to another person or committed to someone else, I truly think there's still a very good chance that the relationship could be fully restored. That's exactly why I always like to say that virtually every single romantic relationship out there can be saved if you simply start doing the right things today. But if we're specifically talking about how to get through a breakup, if it's already happened, it's a process. If it's irreversible, then it's interesting to understand that in psychology, there's this concept that a person assigns their own meaning to certain events in their life. For example, there's a situation where a couple, a guy and a girl, were dating and then they broke up, both of them, just like that. They breathed a sigh of relief. Thank God. Now they can move on. Because that relationship wasn't right for them. It was toxic, codependent. There were a lot of problems. But other people in the exact same situation, a guy and a girl dated for 3 months, they broke up, the guy dumped the girl, and for the girl, that's it. He was the one who will ever want me now, and that's the end of it. And she gives this relationship with that man so much importance, way more than it actually deserves. But in reality, and that's why a breakup like this can hurt us so much, when we've attached so much meaning to the relationship at a stage when maybe it was still a bit, let's say, premature. In other words, too early. So here, it's important to understand that your life goes on. No matter how painful the breakup feels in the moment, it will get a little easier with time. It's not so much that time heals. I don't believe time heals alone. I think when you take the right steps for your mental health, like therapy or even spiritual growth, that kind of time heals. And time on its own doesn't heal anything. Because even after 5 years, you can remember some argument, some hurtful words, and it all flares up like it happened just yesterday. So, yes, after a certain period of time, it does get easier. But that's because the person gradually lowers the intensity of their emotions. The importance of that relationship fades, and after a while, the girl can look at it with a clear head. For example, 3 months ago, looking back at that breakup, she might realize that yes, it hurt, but it's actually good that we broke up. Because now, with the benefit of hindsight from that relationship, I see that, for example, in those moments, I actually felt bad with him. And here and there, for instance, I couldn't give him what he needed, because that's what he wanted. He had his own values, I had mine, he always wanted something different. For example, he wanted to go out, travel somewhere, while I preferred a more homey lifestyle. And so, over time, a person might realize that the breakup that happened wasn't necessarily for the best. But trying to get through all of it, to process everything, you definitely shouldn't try to do on your own. That is, you shouldn't try to think, that's it, he dumped me, and then, as a girl, decide, that's it, I need to lock myself at home, write in my diary, cry, and watch movies all day. You don't need to be alone. In other words, try to get out of your apartment a bit. Talk to someone. Go out with friends, with your girlfriends. Go somewhere. Have some new experiences. Because the more a person shuts themselves off after a breakup, the more they hide away and isolate themselves, the harder it will be for them to get through it over time.
You mentioned that when a relationship ends, after some time, a person realizes that it actually did them good. They realize that they've moved on, that they're moving forward, that it's good nothing worked out. But there's also another side to it. The moment when a person takes on a huge amount of guilt because they feel like they're the one to blame for the collapse of the relationship, for the crisis that happened. And you really do realize that you were in the wrong. And in that moment, and in that one too, you start thinking about how you could have done things differently and how you could have handled it another way. You start eating yourself up with these endless accusations and thoughts about how everything could have turned out completely differently. What should you do in such a situation?
Start forgiving yourself because we are living life for the first time. In hindsight, with the benefit of hindsight, we're all very smart. We know that Bitcoin was 50 cents and everyone should have bought it. And we all understand what should have been done and how once we've already walked that path. When we live, it's the first time, and we find ourselves in many situations for the first time. In a person as a husband for the first time, a wife for the first time. These are the first serious relationships, for example, as a boyfriend or girlfriend. And we do the best we can with what we understand on each particular day. That is, no one is their own enemy, and no one starts a relationship just to make another person suffer. And that's why we always try to make the best choice from everything available to us, from what we understand. And unfortunately, it often turns out that what seems to us like the best choice is not a very good choice for the other person. And the other person may suffer because of us not getting what they need. A woman can spend years in a kind of emotional loneliness, feeling misunderstood, unheard, and unloved. And so, from his side, the man might say, I'm doing everything right. I'm earning money, I'm doing this and that, but she is suffocating next to him. And so, unfortunately, it often happens that when we consider one of our sides to be very strong, and the man thinks, well, I spend a lot of time at work, I'm so serious, straightforward, very responsible, bam, bam, bam. So he thinks this is his strong side, but in reality, what his wife needs is for him to talk to her about emotions, to be able to open up and say whether he feels good or bad inside, to share what's going on. In other words, to have some kind of emotional connection. But he thinks that's a kind of weakness. And unfortunately, in such cases, the family often ends up breaking up, getting divorced, and the wife, later she will tell him, and he might only understand it when the family is already on the verge of falling apart. And so here, on the one hand, you need to forgive yourself and understand that maybe, yes, you really did something foolish, but you did the best you could with what you knew at the time. On the other hand, you need to draw the right conclusions from that and make sure not to repeat it. Because even if right now the family's on the verge of divorce and people want to separate, but if even one person gets involved in the process and starts doing the right things, then any family, any relationship can be saved.
Relationships, they become such a familiar habit that you just get used to the person. And then when they're no longer in your life, you only remember the good things, only the best moments. And you start thinking, well, it's my fault, and so on. And, this feeling of habit, it creates the situation where even after a relationship ends, you still have this need that at least someone was there. Someone would simply wish you good morning, good night, ask how you're doing. And that's why people often rush into new relationships really quickly just to fill this kind of emptiness. Is that the right decision? And how much time should you give yourself before starting a new relationship?
It really depends a lot on the individual, on how quickly you can cool off. There are, for example, girls who can be completely over it in 3 months. They can detach from the experience of past relationships, even if those lasted for several years, while others might need half a year or even a year, so it's really different for everyone. You definitely shouldn't go on dates just for the sake of not being alone. Like, I ended up alone. My girlfriends, some already have kids, husbands, some are dating, some are living with someone, and here I am, just sitting by myself, thinking nobody needs me, and that's it. Tinder, just to go have coffee with whoever, just so I'm not sitting alone. I think that's a really bad idea because if your emotional state hasn't calmed down after your last relationship, if your heart, your mind, your thoughts, your dreams, sometimes even your dreams at night, are still about your ex boyfriend and you go out to meet a new guy, well, you know how girls sometimes write online like, it's all fine, you get over one guy with another. From a psychological point of view, I can say that this isn't very good because, so to speak, you haven't let go of one yet, but you've already let another one in. A third guy is messaging you on Instagram, and it all just turns into chaos. That's why I think it makes sense to take a little time. Maybe a few weeks, maybe a few months. It's different for everyone. Just to calm down, pause, and take a break from the previous relationship. It's actually not a bad idea to delete some old photos, the ones you have together. And if you don't want to throw things away, at least put them somewhere out of sight, like in a closet, the garage, the summer house, or maybe just take a box of his gifts and photos to your parents' balcony. Basically, anything that reminds you of him. Because if you keep running into things at home that remind you of him, it'll just make it a bit harder for you, that's all. You'll need this time more to calm down. And that's why when, for example, you've already calmed down a bit, your emotional state is settled, you realize you're not hiccuping when you think about him and your eye doesn't twitch. Seriously, you don't have to go through that state again. Then gradually, maybe you can start a new relationship with someone. Because, look, girls, this is a really important thing. A man will always sense if you have someone else on your mind. I understand that very often we can act a bit shady in some situations. We might act wisely, but we may not have the psychological preparation or understand exactly what's going on. But when we meet a girl who is mentally with another man, we can feel it. We might not know exactly what's happening, but we definitely feel that I'm not the focus of her attention. That's why it's very wise to let go of the past at least a little bit first and only then start something new. And
What does this process actually depend on? Divorce? Like you said, some people just need a week or two, maybe a month, at most 3 months, and they move on. But for others, even 6 months or a year isn't enough to let go.
it really depends a lot on what meaning a person gave to that relationship and how important they consider it to be. So, for example, if a man or a woman mistakenly believes that in this relationship we dated for 3 years and for sure we were supposed to build a great family together, and the girl, for instance, already imagines herself there. In this whole wedding veil fantasy, she imagines children. She thinks, well, I spent 3 years on him. How could this happen? And he laughed. I mean, it's just not fair. And so she keeps feeding this. She keeps feeding her imagination with this likely happy scenario. At the same time, she lives a life where, for example, there isn't yet another handsome, interesting man by her side. She tends to, for example, if he was the one who initiated the breakup and it came as a surprise to her, she might be inclined to remember only the good things that happened, like how he brought her flowers, how he understood her, how he listened to her, and then how he left her. So several processes are triggered there. First of all, there's the desire to get him back. All that nostalgia, all those moments when she felt good with him, when she was in love. So, when a situation like this happens, it's important to understand that if it happened, maybe it wasn't by accident. That is, maybe in reality, well, I often say that people don't go looking for something better when things are already good. And when a man leaves you, for example, you were together for a while and then he left. Honestly, that's not such bad news for you. This might indicate I understand that it's not very pleasant to realize or, so to speak, to accept this thought. It can be a bit painful, but if you were dating some guy for 3 or 4 years and then he left you for another girl, he found someone else, something like that, this might indicate that he wasn't getting what he needed from the relationship with you. That is, you didn't see eye to eye on values, character, habits, or maybe even your shared future. Or maybe some other things. Basically, being with you, he wasn't getting what he needed as a man in a relationship with you. Because if I'm dating a girl and I enjoy spending time with her, if I find her interesting, I realize that our visions of the future match up. I see that she gets me. We share the same vibe. She laughs at my sense of humor. There's also a joking response there, like if everything's going well between us, then that's the moment. That's when things like weddings and serious relationship proposals come up really quickly, like really fast. But when everything drags on for years and just barely feels alive, like something is happening here and there, and then it all just ends. So that shows that most likely he wasn't getting what he needed in that relationship. And that's not such a bad idea. It's not such bad news. Because if you had started a family and he kept suffering in that family, he would have left anyway. You would have. Only then it would have been about crime, kids, parents, alimony, courts, and all that stuff. And that's exactly why, if someone leaves, it's not such a bad thing. It means that in their relationship with us, they weren't getting what they needed, and they went to look for it somewhere else. Okay, we let them go peacefully. If we want to change something within ourselves, to learn how to give a person what they need, to make them happy, to be more open, more sensitive to another person's needs, great. No one is stopping us from growing in relationships. But sitting around and feeding your imagination with scenarios like, what if I hadn't said that back then? What if I hadn't done that? In other words, fueling your mind with hypothetical scenarios, there's no point. because our life, honestly, all events happen as they should, cause and effect, and our actions at every level of our lives. They provide very honest feedback in the form of results. In business, no one has the illusion that if I do the wrong things, I'll become a millionaire. A person understands I have to do things skillfully in business and my income will grow. Happiness in family life is the same way. You have to do the right things in your family life, during the dating stage and beyond, so that the level of happiness in your relationship grows. And so, if you haven't yet learned how to do this and give your loved one what they need, if you haven't learned to listen, haven't learned, so to speak, to take care of your loved one, no matter if it's a guy or a girl, then everything just happens fairly and calmly. And so you can calmly accept this and do some work on your mistakes. And move on to new relationships where you can try to do all this from scratch. Friends, if you want to better understand the topic of relationships, I invite you to join our school for the course called Relationships from A to Z. You can find the details of this course below this video.
When we talk about breaking up and letting someone go, for me, the word let go means that this person is no longer in your life. Because what bothers and hurts us the most is when we see it. When we keep seeing the person, keep hearing them, and when they continue to be in our lives, it still doesn't really work to let them go completely. And it's exactly about how to communicate and behave when you're no longer a couple, when you've broken up, but there are still so many things you share. And this could be anything from a shared business, work, maybe some joint projects, even friends. Or, if we're talking more seriously, even children.
Well, again, I believe that when people break up, it doesn't have to mean becoming enemies. You can break up in a normal, calm way. And a lot of people try to stay friends after they break up, but honestly, that's a pretty complicated thing. The point is, when you have a lot tying you together, you just need to agree on certain things. So you're no longer husband and wife or boyfriend and girlfriend, but if you still have a lot of things connecting you, if you were a couple, you can just quickly exchange certain packages, all that stuff. I know people like to return things, the girl gives back the guy's gifts, they swap toothbrushes, basically all that kind of thing. When we talk about family, about marriage, it's a bit more complicated, of course, especially when there's a child involved. So I think in this case, you just have to sit down and work things out, because just like in business, people make some kind of contract, so to speak. When you're no longer husband and wife, you can calmly sit down and put everything down on paper. For example, let's say on weekends the child goes to you. If we have a joint business, let's divide it like this and that. If we have shared property, we can sell it. For example, turn a 3-room apartment into 2 one-room apartments, or just split it up or gradually have someone pay the other out. If there are a lot of things that, so to speak, connect you, you just need to set the ground rules, where and under what conditions you meet. If, for example, a man, this happens to a lot of men, he's already in a new relationship, but he has a child from his first marriage, and he has to communicate with the child's mother, his first wife, and his new girlfriend. It just drives her absolutely crazy. She practically burns up like a phoenix. Thank you. Because of all this, because he communicates with her, she checks his phone more often than he does. So really, you just need to come to an agreement. Like, for example, say, look, we have a child together. So we will still be communicating, we'll be talking about these kinds of topics, and sometimes we'll call each other. Maybe sometimes the 3 of us will even meet up. But there need to be more or less clear ground rules, because when there's no clarity, there's room for people to make things up. For example, sometimes a woman, even after she and her husband have separated, still wants him to come back to the family. He's got a lover now, but she thinks like, well, he'll come back eventually. It's just a matter of time. He'll get it out of his system. I've already forgiven him. We'll have a family again, just like it used to be. And she might keep living with that expectation. And honestly, that's not a great idea, because she's basically put her life on pause at that point. But if they've set the ground rules, for example, the man says, I'll come pick up the child once a week, and I'll be there 3 times a week or even 5 times a week. I'll call the child. So when he shows up in her family, in her life, with that kind of frequency, for her, it's not the kind of thing where, oh, he started coming to see us more often. Maybe he wants to come back. Maybe we should do something about it. So there won't be those illusions, which can be very painful. Because if a man wants to come back, he will. And that's great. If the family reunites, I'm all for it. But you probably just shouldn't put your whole life on hold waiting for him to come back. Because unfortunately, experience shows that when a man crosses that red line and goes to another woman, many don't come back. Some do, but many don't. But living with the expectation that you just need to endure it now and in a year he'll get it out of his system and come back can lead to a very painful disappointment later on.
You've already started talking about this idea, how to stay friends after a divorce. And I've heard a lot of stories that say the best way to end a relationship is when you stay friends. And for example, there are dozens of celebrity couples who stayed friends after their divorce and now have healthy relationships with their exes. In your honest opinion, do you really think it is actually worth trying to stay friends with them after everything? To maintain these healthy relationships.
There is that old saying that from hate to love is often just a single tiny step. And when we love someone deeply and then that person betrays us or just leaves, those relationships fall apart and they leave us behind. For many people, that thread that used to be the thread of love suddenly snaps in two, and the person becomes a total and complete stranger to us. And I've heard so many times, like, he was everything to me, a girl says. He was so desired, so loved by me. But after he betrayed me, or after he left me somewhere, left me alone with the kids, he became just as much of a stranger to me. That is, this secret thread, it breaks, and the attitude becomes completely different. And that's why I think very few people manage to stay friends, because this person becomes a stranger. But on the other hand, you have so many different memories connected to them. Well, a woman has been going to bed with a man for many years. She's gotten used to him. They became almost like one. So then, just being friends, for example, when he has a new wife and I don't know, they go to each other's birthday parties with gifts. Well, it's a really complicated story because it's your ex. You have some memories with him. He did good things in your life. He helped you, he listened to you. And for example, your current husband, he's not as attentive, and it's like a constant trigger for you. When you meet someone who listens to you attentively, who's very sensitive to you, and here you don't get that, so this creates some serious internal issues. That's why I think that in order to build a new relationship, you really need to be able to detach from the past ones. And that doesn't mean you have to become enemies or take revenge on the person or dig up dirt on them like some people do. Well, excuse me, I just have no words like those foolish men. Sometimes they even start posting intimate photos of their ex-wife or girlfriend somewhere publicly. All sorts of things. I don't even know if people like that have any brains at all when they do such things. It seems to me they don't. I mean, you don't have to become enemies, but I think it's really hard to stay friends because you need to focus on the new person you love in your life, on a new girlfriend or a new boyfriend. And that's why your attention should be focused there. And if you're like friends with your ex-husband or ex-wife, first of all, that can really bother your new partner in your life. And secondly, you might not be able to fully let go of it. So I think you need to just set some ground rules there. If you share property or a child, agree on some kind of arrangement, a time frame, a schedule, visits, so that it's clear why you're still communicating, but not going beyond that, and making sure you stay fully focused on the new person. And
I also think that people go through this. People go through this stage of breaking up in completely different ways. Some totally withdraw into themselves, some try to latch on to another person, some try to show that everything in their life is great and awesome, and, somewhere deep down they don't admit it to themselves, and especially not to those around them, that they're hurting. Because how can you admit that, let's say, you and this person, you were together for 4 years, or maybe you even started a family, and now it's all, over? And you keep acting like everything is great, that your life is even better than it was before that relationship. And really, can you convince yourself that everything is awesome, everything is great, and just, like that? Sometimes, is it better to just brush this issue aside, or is it really worth working through it and actually dealing with it?
I think you can't really fool yourself for very long. I remember I watched this one movie where the main character, after breaking up with his beloved, kept repeating, "It doesn't hurt. I'm a robot. It doesn't hurt. I'm a robot." And he kept doing this throughout the movie, like 3 or 4 times. He would say, "I don't feel anything. I'm a robot." And I think that's the worst way to deal with the problem because you can't run away from yourself. You can fool people on Instagram. You can even fool your psychologist. You can tell all your friends, your family, your loved ones. Not like it's nothing, everything's fine. Like he left, she left, and that's okay. I mean, I quit. Now I'm free, or supposedly free, and that's it for me. All right, just like those Americans with $100,000 smile. But inside, when you go to bed and stare at the ceiling, you realize that your level of hypocrisy and the fact that you're actually dissatisfied with your life, that you feel like you're left with nothing, that hasn't gone anywhere. That's exactly like you shouldn't try to pretend that everything's fine. You need to reach out for help. Because when a person goes to a psychologist, to a counselor, when someone reads the right book, or when someone just goes somewhere in the Carpathians with a friend and spends a few days just hiking in the mountains, sitting in some hot tub and drinking some honey with pine cone jam, or something else like that, that's the moment. A reset, a moment of rest, a moment when you reconnect with yourself a little, when you unplug for a bit. You learn to listen to yourself to better understand your own state, and that's why pretending like nothing's wrong doesn't work. Well, as they say, that's not a good strategy. It's better to say, yes, it hurts right now. Yes, I'm sad right now. I feel abandoned. I feel left behind. That doesn't make us victims. So, for example, if a girl, after a breakup, if she honestly tells herself what she's feeling right now, that doesn't make her a victim. Being a victim is when you say, oh, he left me, it's all his fault, everything is his fault. The whole problem was with him, and that's how he treated me. That's more of a victim mentality. But when we calmly and honestly just say to ourselves, yes, it hurts right now, I feel this and that, and we understand these emotions, we learn to process them in a healthy way. And at the same time, we try not to withdraw into ourselves, but to get out of the room, get out of the state we're in, ask for help, read something, go to the theater, relax, put on sneakers and go for a run. In other words, read your favorite book. That is, when we come out of this stagnant state, we'll see that our emotions will gradually start to improve. And in this way, we won't be held hostage by the situation. So, honestly, trying to sell the whole world on the idea that you're not hurting, well, people just aren't that stupid after all. They'll see your true state. And even if you manage to fool someone in the moment, there's really no point in lying to yourself. Friends, if you like the content we create, you can support our team. We have a lot of different projects, we run various pages, invite different guests, and that's why it often happens that we need support. We need your support. If you want to discover even more inspiring content like what you're watching in here and now, and partner with us to transform other people's lives together with you, you can take a moment to look at the information below this video and support us by choosing to invest in our ongoing work in any way that's convenient for you. Thank you so much for your support.
When you end up, as you said, left with nothing, the first question is, how do you put the pieces back together? What should you do with it? And how can you help yourself? So I have one more thing for you. The last question to wrap up our broadcast. Specifically, how do you restore your wholeness? How do you realize that you're not to blame, that the problem wasn't you? And how do you start building your future from here?
To be completely honest, sometimes the problem is, at least in part, with you too. Sometimes your last relationship didn't work out because you did some foolish things. You have to honestly admit that. Did the other person act perfectly? Well, probably not either, and neither did we. Relationships are a two-way street. It's a two-sided process. There were probably mistakes on both sides, but you shouldn't judge or punish yourself for that. You just need to work honestly on any mistakes, draw conclusions from them, and, for example, realize that, okay, I made some gaps there. I didn't pay attention to certain things. So in my next relationships, I'll act completely differently. But how do you regain your sense of wholeness overall? Yes, here it's important to understand, but The fact that another person didn't choose us and went off somewhere else to look for something doesn't affect our wholeness in any way. It actually doesn't affect it at all. Because if a guy is dating a girl and the guy doesn't choose the girl or the man,